Good morning, dear students. My name is Miss Maria Ahmed Waseem from Little Angels High School, Gwalior, and I am your science teacher. Welcome back to our online session. The chapter that we have been discussing till now is Reproduction in Flowering Plants. I hope you have understood the previous two videos well. So now let's get started with this session. In this session, we will be learning about parts of a flower, sexual reproduction, pollination, parts of seed, and lastly, plant growth. Now, all these topics are interrelated to each other. Now, without wasting any time, let's get started. The first topic of discussion is parts of a flower. Now, I have numbered all the parts of the flower, and those are first the petal, second the sepal, third the stamen. Now, stamen is the male part of the flower, and last is the carpel, which is the female part of the flower. Now, we will be discussing about these parts in little detail. Petals. They are the colored leafy structures that surround the reproductive parts of the flower. They are generally colored so that they can attract pollinators. Now, what are pollinators? Pollinators are those animals and birds which help in the process of pollination. Now, what is pollination? We will be discussing about pollination in this session. Sepals. Sepals are green in color and they provide protection and support to the flower. Now coming on to the male part of the flower, it is called as the stamen and it is divided into two parts, the anther and the filament. And in the same way, carpel, which is the female part of the flower, it has three parts, the stigma, style and the ovary. Now, our next topic of discussion is sexual reproduction. In our previous video, we had discussed about asexual reproduction, in which I told you that in asexual reproduction there is involvement of only one parent to give rise to a young one, and that young one is exactly identical to the parent. But in sexual reproduction there is involvement of two parents to give rise to a young one. Now, when a plant matures, it produces flowers and fruits. This we already know. Now, in flowers, there are a male reproductive part and female reproductive part, which produce male cell and female cell respectively. Now, these female cell and male cell fuse to form a seed. Now, when these seeds are sown into the soil, they germinate to give a new plant, which is a baby plant. This baby plant grows into a mature plant and produces flowers again. Now, the female part is called the carpel, which we have discussed in the previous slide, and it produces the female cell, which is the ovum. And in the same way, the male part is called the stamen, and it produces male cell, which are the pollen grain. You need to keep these in mind for our further discussion. The next topic is pollination. What is pollination? Transfer of pollen grains from the male part, that is the stamen, to the female part, that is the carpel, is known as pollination. During pollination, the pollen grain falls on the stigma. Now, stigma is the part of the female part of the flower. And then the male cell, which is the pollen grain, and the female cell, which is the ovum, fuses to form a seed. These seeds germinate to give rise to a new plant. Now, pollination is of two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Please look into the figure to understand it in a better way. When pollen lands on the stigma of the same flower, it is known as self-pollination, whereas when pollen lands on the stigma of other flower, it is known as cross-pollination. In cross-pollination, two flowers are involved, while in self-pollination only one flower is involved. Now, our next topic is parts of seed. What are the parts of seed? Radicle, plumule, cotyledon, and seed coat. Now, there is one question that why do we need coat? A coat protects us. In the same way, a seed also has a seed coat which protects the seed from any external damage. Now, what is inside the seed that needs to be protected? Inside the coat is a baby plant. Along with it, there is stored food. The stored food helps the baby plant to grow. Now, the plumule is the future shoot of the plant. Radicle is the future root of the plant. And what is cotyledon? Cotyledon is the swollen part of the seed. It is where the food is stored. And in a seed, there can be either two cotyledons or only one cotyledon. Now that we have discussed the parts of the seed, it is easier to understand the next topic, which is plant growth. In this, we will be studying that how a seed gradually becomes a seedling. A very small baby plant is known as a seedling. Now, in this entire figure, you will see that there is radicle, which is the future root of the plant, there is plumule, which is the future shoot of the plant, and then in favorable condition, the seed coat ruptures and then the seedling comes out. Now, seeds grow into seedlings which further grow into a new plant only under favorable conditions. Now, what are these favorable conditions? The favorable conditions are that the seed should get the right amount of sunlight, water, space, and air. Then only it will germinate into a seedling. Now, what happens? Some of these seeds can be eaten by animals and birds, and some may not get the right condition to germinate. So, what will happen to them? They will dry up, and of course, they will die. Now we have discussed all the topics, and in the starting, I told you that all these things are related to each other. Now, by the help of this cycle, you will be able to understand in a better way how all these topics are related to each other. Now, please look at figure number first. There you see a flower with stamen. Now, stamen is the male part of the flower and it produces what? It produces pollen grain. So, then there is this process of pollination which goes on, in which the pollen grain from the male part of the flower lands on the stigma, which is the female part of the flower. And here the ovum and the pollen grain fuse together to form a seed. Now the seed germinates to produce a plant. And then finally this plant matures and it produces flower. And again this entire cycle will take place. Now, we have been discussing till now that how a plant which gives flower produces more how it produces more plants. But have you ever wondered how a non-flowering plant gives rise to new plant? Let's see. Some plants such as ferns and mosses do not produce flowers, and those are called non-flowering plants. Now, how are they able to produce new plants? They produce tiny structures known as spores at maturity. When spores fall on suitable place or at moist place, they germinate into new plants. Now, with this, we come to the end of the session. Thank you.